The end of an era. Members of the Kurdish Workers Party lay down their arms, ending a decades-long struggle with Turkiye. But will this move by the PKK lead to real reconciliation? And what does this shift mean for Kurds across the region? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. It's one of the longest-running conflicts in the Middle East, and it's about to come to an end. Members of the Kurdistan Workers Party, or PKK, started to lay down their arms at a ceremony in northern Iraq. It comes 2 months after the group said that it would end its armed struggle against Turkiye and shift to democratic politics. Reaction's been mixed. Some Kurds think that it could pave the way to peace. Others, though, argue that it's a concession with no gains. So, how will this process play out in Turkiye and the wider region? We'll discuss all that with our guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Narges Mobileki.
After more than 4 decades of fighting, this is the moment members of the Kurdistan Workers Party, the PKK, laid down their weapons. Most of its fighters are based in the mountainous regions of northern Iraq, near the Turkish border. And that's where, on Friday, their symbolic disarmament was commemorated. There have been mixed reactions from both Kurds and Turks.
This is the best thing that could happen. There was no need for all those years of bloodshed. This has economical, social, and moral dimensions.
No one can trust the PKK. There was a peace process before this, but lots of things happened and they were all covered up. Now the same thing is happening again.
The ceremony marks a significant point in the PKK's history. Founded in 1978 by Abdullah Öcalan, it aimed to establish an independent Kurdish state. Decades of conflict with Turkiye killed more than 40,000 people, and the US, EU and Turkiye designated it a terrorist organisation. But then, 2 months ago, the group announced it would disarm. And on the eve of the ceremony in Süleymaniye, Öcalan released his first public video message since being jailed 26 years ago.
What has been done is a voluntary transition from the phase of armed struggle to the phase of democratic politics and law. This is not a loss, but has to be regarded as a historical gain.
Turkiye's pro-Kurdish DM party is mediating peace talks between the PKK and the government. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says both Turkiye and the wider region stand to benefit. But the wider consequences are unclear. PKK affiliates and allies are spread across the Middle East. Syria's northeast is largely controlled by the SDF, a Kurdish-led military force Turkiye has fought for the past decade. And while the SDF leader has welcomed the PKK's disarmament, he says his group will not follow suit. Another ally, the PKK, says its goal is to declare an autonomous Kurdish region in Iran. Even within the PKK, it's unclear whether all members will actually lay down their weapons. So while the disarming ceremony is historic, it is still not clear what role the PKK will play across the region. Narges Mobileki, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Right, let's bring in our guests. We're joined from Istanbul by Galip Dalay, a non-resident senior fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. In Virginia is Mohammed Salih, a non-resident senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and a specialist in Kurdish affairs. And from New York, we're joined by David L. Phillips, the director of the program on peacebuilding and rights at Columbia University. He previously served as a senior advisor on foreign affairs to the US State Department. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Galip, let's start with you. So we've had the symbolic first step. What happens now?
Well, what happens now is, I think, the continuation of the disarmament process and the continuation now, also the need to take the legal steps, particularly in terms of the commission that will be established within the parliament to prepare the legal ground for the one that is disarming to return to to make it like easier for their societal integration. So the two things will continue at the same time. The disarmament process is a process. So as you put it, this is like the first symbolic but also historical step that we have seen. We will see the continuation of it. The Öcalan statement, the leader of the PKK, the Öcalan statements also is quite clear that it wants this process not to drag for a long time, but to be speedy. But at the same time, there's like legal, constitutional steps that needs to be taken within the Turkey. The parliament is probably going to announce the formation of a commission that will make these legal steps easier, probably later this month. And also, like once the parliament convenes in the fall, we will see the constitutional and then all the legal steps that will accompany this process. Because it's not only about the PKK's disarmament at this stage, the legal steps, but also it will include the steps that will be taken on the Kurdish issue at the same time.
We'll talk more about the legal stuff, as you put it, in just a few minutes. But first, Mohammed, will all PKK members lay down their arms? What could happen if some rank-and-file members disagree with the decision to do so?
That's an excellent question. We don't know really as of now. Of course, the idea, the hope is that, the PKK will disband totally, wholly as an organization. But we have to acknowledge that as encouraging as the current step and some of the previous steps have been, the entire process is still really quite vague and unclear. And even though the Turkish government has been insisting that the PKK and some of the other organizations that they, claim are linked to the PKK in Syria and elsewhere need to be disbanded as well, we are not so sure and certain about that. And there are indications that, some of the groups that have been part of the PKK's ideological universe, to put it that way, might, still continue to exist in one way or another.
David, with the experience of Ireland, Colombia, Sri Lanka and Spain in mind, the peace process is there. What should happen here now in terms of demobilization and reintegration? And might that even include an amnesty agreement?
That raises a broader question about transitional justice. We have to be careful not to sell short the goal of reintegration, particularly because there are so many female fighters. You need to have a gender component, and society as a whole needs to be informed and needs to participate. So reintegration is probably the most difficult task. So is the task of transitional justice and holding perpetrators accountable. It seems like a straightforward and linear process, but these different baskets have to work together in order to achieve a greater goal.
So, where do you start, David? You say it's a difficult process. How long is all of this going to take, and how do we get the thing moving?
Well, you start with the technical tasks of demobilization and disarmament. Those are fairly straightforward. But then you need to have a broader program of reintegration that includes economic development and reintegrating fighters into the society as a whole. So finding work for them, making sure that the communities where they are reintegrated accept them. Only when you have an integrated and holistic approach can you get to the finish line. And even then, it's not a quick or straightforward process. It's multifaceted and involves buy-in from the entire society.
Galip, what are the implications of the PKK's dissolution for Turkiye and for Turkish democracy?
Well, the implication of the PKK for Turkey is immense. I mean, this has been a more than 4 decades long conflict that has claimed more than 40,000 lives, according to the official statistic. The unofficial numbers goes as high as like 100,000, over 100,000. So therefore, the implication of this very immense. It has, again, like for the 4 decades, that has very much shaped the Turkey's domestic politics, the Turkey's state structure, the Turkey's threat perception domestically, but in terms of regionally. So now it will be a restructuring of Turkish politics in which there is no longer the PKK's arms. So this is immense. Secondly, I think this process will once again lead to the reimagination of the Turkish citizenship, the idea of the Turkish nationhood, and the Turkish geopolitical identity. So not only in terms of how Turkey will perceive itself as a nation, how the Turkey will frame its citizenship that will be more inclusive, in which the Kurds needs to be feeling as included as anyone else. It will also redefine the Turkish geopolitical identity when it comes to how to approach with the regional Kurds. Let's not forget, not long time ago, the Iraqi Kurds, the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq was also perceived through the threat perception in Turkey, but now it has turned into one of the closest ally of Turkey. So therefore, this process will have also implication in terms of how the Turkey will approach the Syrian Kurds and then the regional Kurds in general. So both domestic, regional, and international implication will be immense. And the final points I would say, the Kurdish issue, particularly the U.S. partnership with SDF, was the biggest thorn in the U.S.-Turkish relation over the last decade. So the resolution of the Kurdish issue, the settlement of the Kurdish issue, will take away this, and that will probably have positive implication on the state of Turkish-U.S. relationship when it comes to broader geopolitical positioning in the Middle East.
Okay, we'll talk more about that in a few moments. Mohammed, though, first of all, how does this moment differ from the 2013-15 solution process, when Öcalan accused the government of not following through on political reforms? The Turkish government then accused the group of not fully withdrawing from the territories that it had agreed to do. What lessons from then might be applied now?
Well, on the positive side, I think everyone would agree that the extent that the process has come this time is, greater than what it did in 2013 to 2015 time period. But on the flip side of it, there is less transparency this time around. We are not yet sure what kind of steps exactly the government is going to take, what kind of reciprocity would be there. And I think one of the important lessons is really, for this process to be transparent, and that the presence of other third parties, whether, other Turkish political parties or parliamentary blocs, or ideally even international mediators in the process could be very helpful. What we have seen so far is that this process is exclusively managed between the government of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his closest partner, Devlet Bahçeli, and the Kurdish movement, represented by Abdullah Öcalan as the leader of the PKK, who is currently imprisoned in Turkey, as well as the Equality and Democracy Party in Turkey, DEM party. So that is one of the major risks in this process, that if, this entire negotiation is going to break down at some point, it might not really be very easy to pinpoint blame and be able to identify what went wrong exactly, especially given the fact that we don't even have, a publicized agreement between the two sides that would give everyone a sense of what kind of steps, are supposed to be followed through during this entire process.
David, given what Mohammed was saying, what might the Turkish government do now in terms of acknowledging the PKK's move? What sort of concessions might it make in return for the PKK's measure? Is there the will from the Turkish side to meet the political and legal demands made by the PKK?
Well, motivation is very important here. It's been widely speculated that the reason why Tayyip Erdogan entered into this process is because he's looking for Kurdish support to extend the term of his presidency and have Kurdish support in new elections. So there needs to be not just a buy-in by the people, but there needs to be a buy-in by the society as a whole. And so far, we haven't seen in the past any genuine commitment from Erdogan to this process. So it needs to be tested. The international community needs to be involved. For reintegration to occur, there needs to be economic development. And that requires investment from third parties. It also requires political support from countries like the United States and the EU so that Turkey can be more fully integrated. This is a process that's going to take some time. It's going to take partnerships. So we need to view it as a long-term endeavor.
Galip, do you agree with that? What will the PKK need to do to convince not only Turkiye's government, but its people that it has now become solely a political party in pursuit of peace?
Well, I think let's first correctly, contextualize it. PKK is not disarming itself; it's dissolving itself. So, therefore, the idea that there will not be a PKK, because this is like what Öcalan called for. So, it's not disarmament, this is dissolution process. Secondly, there is a very quite strong Kurdish political party, pro-Kurdish political party, which is the third largest within the parliament. I think the disappearance of the shadow of the arms over the politics will further empower the Kurdish movement. So the Kurdish movement, the political Kurdish movement in Turkey, will emerge strengthened and more legitimate and more acceptable from this, with its demands being seen more legitimate. I mean, if you look at the public surveys right now, there is like growing acceptance of the demands, like, the Kurdish language education, the education in the Kurdish language. There is more acceptance for a reformulation of a much more inclusive citizenship clause. There's a much more demand for empowerment of the local governance, meaning the municipalities, reinstituting the mayors that has been elected but removed by the government from their positions. So those kind of some of the key demands that will be very much part and parcel of the Kurdish movement in Turkey has already quite significant broader political societal acceptance. I mean, the recent survey by Ankara Institute, which was yesterday and released, shows in details how actually some of these key demands right now becoming seen more legitimate. I think with the absence of the arms, there will be further acceptance of this. And I think those demands will be more and more likely to be attained. When it comes to the other things, like when it comes to regional Kurds, but most important to Syrian Kurds, you already see the change of a political language. You don't see the language of terrorism, etc., being utilized. Right now, you see more and more the SDF rather than the previously PKK, YPG acronyms to be used to describe the Syrian Kurds. So you already see the change of narrative. And I think the change of narrative will also lead to more flexibility when it comes to the potential political pictures that might emerge in Syria. So it is already a gain for the Kurdish political movement in Turkey. And finally, the idea that the arms will not serve the Kurdish interests in Turkey was already very widely prevalent, not only inside Turkey, but among the Kurdish movement and then the Kurdish society for decades right now, not only today. I think the PKK, the idea that the PKK should lay down the arms has been very popular with the Kurdish society and politics for more than decades, right?
Mohammed, Galip mentioned the SDF. What will this mean for them? They've said that while they applaud what the PKK has done, they're not going to be doing the same. And for the benefit of anyone who doesn't know, that the SDF is the Kurdish force in Syria.
Well, there is some, sort of connection and linkage here, but the expectation that, if the Turkish PKK negotiations is going to culminate in a positive outcome, that would also automatically, result in a similar outcome in Syria between the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, and the Damascus government. might not be very realistic. The Kurdish situation and question in Syria has its own particularities and characteristics. Yes, if there is, any sort of major resolution of the Kurdish issue in Turkey, it will reflect positively on the situation in Syria as well. But the Syrian Kurds have had, their own particular history of dealing with the Syrian government, their own set of demands. And the SDF inside Syria is really in a position that the PKK has never been in Turkey. SDF is, in charge of almost 1/3 of the Syrian territory. It is running a local administration and government where, the Kurdish population there enjoy full rights. The type of rights that the Kurds in Turkey have never, had or enjoyed. And they're also a major military force inside Syria, and also an important ally of the United States, at least so far, in the fight against jihadi terrorist groups such as ISIS. So, overall, while the, any sort of major breakthrough in Turkey can positively reflect on what is happening in Syria, but taking that as meaning, that will also directly lead to a resolution of the disputes between the SDF and the Damascus government might not be really very realistic.
All right, David, how crucial to what happens now between the disbanded PKK and the Turkiye's government are the fledgling government in Damascus and the SDF?
Well, there's one factor that both the SDF and the PKK and PAJAK agree on. They support decentralization or federalism. So you need to have a corresponding political process to diffuse power, to devolve power, to give Kurds greater cultural and political rights. If that's achieved, then you'll have a greater likelihood of sustainable peace. That's why the political process that Galip talked about earlier with the parliamentary committee is critical. This isn't going to be done in a ceremony or symbolically. It needs the underpinning of the rule of law. And for that to happen, you need to have broad support among Turkey's political parties, that they want to decentralize and they want to share power. Unfortunately, federalism has become kind of a radioactive term in the region. So implementing devolution is going to be hard.
Okay. Galip, what impact could the PKK's dissolution have on Israel's policy towards Syria?
Well, yes. The first things, the Kurdish movement in Turkey itself, both the PKK, Öcalan, or the legal Kurdish political party is not demanding any form of federalism. Rather, the term that they are using is the empowerment of the local governance, municipalities, and I think that there is growing societal support for this. When it comes to Syria, I think one impact will be because in the end the Israel is capitalizing on the grievances of the identity groups in different countries, so to keep the central governments weak and fragmented. I think if the Kurdish issue in Turkey resolved, and if there is a better prospect in terms of the accommodation between the SDF and then the Damascus, that is reducing the political groups that Israel can capitalize on it to keep the central government fragmented and weak. So in a sense, this is actually reducing Israel's potential, the potential to use some of these grievances as an instrument in its regional policy. Okay. Secondly, I think one element that Israel was hoping for is the acrimonious relationship between Turkey and the Kurds, not only inside Turkey but across the region. This was also giving Israel both narrative and the political maneuvering. I think this will also be shot because at the end of the day, the resolution of the Kurdish issue does not only require an inclusive identity framework but also better accommodation between Kurds and Turkey, in which the Kurds will be seen as an ally for Turkey, not a foe.
All right. Mohammed, Ankaра's approach to its neighbourhood has long been influenced by the conflict with the PKK. How will the disbanding of the PKK affect Turkey's relations with its neighbours?
If everything goes through, in the right way, it will boost the relationship between Turkey and the Kurds in the region. The Kurdish question inside Turkey has long been one of the major impediments to better relations between, the Kurds across the region and the government of Turkey. So any, breakthrough and resolution inside Turkey will really reflect positively. But at the same time, we also have to, remember that Kurds are people, in the region who have had their long-standing grievances, and they've struggled for over a century by now for some sort of recognition. That has not come through in the form of a state, and is unlikely to happen in that way, at least anytime soon. But we are also at the moment in regional geopolitics, which is very fluid. Israel has emerged as the major shaper of regional geopolitics. So that gives Kurds some sort of room to...
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're running out of time here, and I just want to get one last question in with David. Given that a long-lasting peace could transform, as we heard from Galip, Turkey's domestic politics and international relations, are you, David, optimistic that unlike in 2013, 2015, this actually has legs?
It does have legs if there is the will on Erdogan's part to fully implement the agreements. If he does that and he satisfies the Kurds' demand for political and cultural rights, then we're going to see a new era. If this is merely a fig leaf for Erdogan to consolidate his power, then the likelihood of a return to violence still exists.
All right. There, gentlemen, I'm afraid we must end it. Many thanks indeed to you all, Galip, Dalay, Mohammed, Salih and David L. Phillips. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website. That's at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can join us at our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can join the conversation on X. Our handle there at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the whole team, thanks for watching. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.